How many planets does our solar system have? Which ancient civilization already knew the answer, thousands of years before telescopes existed? And how did a people who supposedly lived by herding sheep and planting barley describe with precision worlds that modern science only confirmed in the 19th century? The answer is locked inside 500,000 burned clay tablets, and an artificial intelligence called Axiom just forced that lock open. Around 4,000 years before our era, in southern Mesopotamia, on a strip of land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Sumerian civilization appeared out of nowhere. And when I say out of nowhere, that's not a figure of speech. There are no intermediate stages. There are no rough early attempts at social organization that gradually improved over centuries. The archaeological record shows a leap that shouldn't be possible. In a window far too short for any model of human development to account for, those people were already operating with a writing system of absurd complexity, already mastering large-scale irrigation, already had legal codes, performed surgeries, calculated the positions of celestial bodies that nobody could see with the naked eye. Historians labeled this the Sumerian miracle and moved on as if giving the problem a pretty name were the same thing as solving it. We didn't move on. We took the entire archive of carbon-14 dating available for that region, cross-referenced it with the archaeological records from the occupation layers, combined all of that with the already deciphered contents of thousands of cuneiform tablets, and fed Axiom with that database. The question we asked was straightforward. What is the mathematical probability that nomadic tribes of gatherers and herders, with no documented contact with any other advanced civilization, independently developed this level of knowledge in this span of time? When the simulations finished, the number that came out leaves no room for debate. 0.0%. It's not a low number. It's the complete absence of statistical possibility within any known evolutionary model. What's most unsettling isn't even the writing or the hydraulic engineering. What keeps you up at night is their astronomy. The Sumerians left it recorded in clay that our solar system has more planets than the 5 visible to the naked eye. They described Uranus with details about the coloring of its atmosphere. They described Neptune and its relative size compared to its neighbors. Uranus was only officially discovered in 1781 by William Herschel, using a telescope that was the most advanced of its time. Neptune came later, in 1846, and only because mathematicians noticed that something heavy was pulling Uranus off its predicted course. Pluto only in 1930. Those people from 4,000 years before Christ had no telescope whatsoever, and yet they nailed information that it took us millennia to confirm. Textbooks gloss right over one thing. The Sumerians didn't use our decimal system, the one based on 10 on the fingers of your hand. They operated on a base 60. Sounds like a boring technical detail, but look at what it means in practice. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. You use their system every single day without knowing it. Think about it with me. Why would a people who supposedly lived by counting sacks of grain and heads of cattle need such a heavy mathematical base? 10 fingers on your hand can handle any market transaction. Base 60 is a whole different category. It allows you to divide time and space with a rigor that only makes sense when you're calculating long trajectories, orbits that take years or centuries to complete. It makes sense if you need to track something moving across the sky over enormous stretches of time, or if someone taught you how. The Sumerians themselves left a document that pushes this conversation into an even more uncomfortable place. The Sumerian king list is a real tablet. It's in a museum, anyone can go see it. It lists the rulers who supposedly reigned before a great flood, and their reign lengths are measured in a unit called Sa, which equals 3,600 Earth years. King Alulim supposedly ruled for 28,800 years, Alalgar for 36,000. The total for the first 8 kings comes to 241,200 years. Scholars dismiss these numbers as mythological exaggeration, as if scribes trained for years in a strict school would waste clay and labor to invent random, meaningless numbers. Those numbers are not random. Every single one of them is divisible by 3,600. Every one. That number, 3600, is going to show up where you least expect it. There is a text that survived more than 3,000 years inside clay libraries scattered across Mesopotamia. Its name is Enuma Elish, and for centuries, scholars treated this document as religious mythology, a Babylonian fable about gods fighting in the sky. Marduk against Tiamat, the hero against the monster, order defeating chaos. A nice story to tell in a temple and nothing more. When you strip away the ritualistic language and look at what the text actually describes in terms of movements, collisions and fragmentations, the picture changes completely. The Enuma Elish doesn't talk about gods. It describes celestial bodies. Tiamat was a watery planet positioned between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. Marduk was a massive object that invaded the solar system from the outside, captured by the sun's gravity on a path that crossed the inner region of our system. The text details how Marduk's satellites collided with Tiamat, how the orbits of the smaller bodies were altered by gravitational drag, and how the final impact cracked that planet into two unequal pieces. One of those pieces was pushed into a more inward orbit and became Earth. The other scattered into a belt of debris that occupies the space between Mars and Jupiter to this day, what modern astronomy calls the asteroid belt. When you read that description side by side with current models of planetary formation, the discomfort is enormous. The giant impact hypothesis, which is how modern science explains the origin of the Moon and certain anomalies in our planet's composition, follows a mechanism similar to what this 3,000-year-old text describes. The difference is that the Babylonians, or rather the Sumerians who originated this tradition, had no known reason to know any of this. No telescope, no spectrometer, no probe. And yet the account lines up with the physics. The Enuma Elish is one piece. The real anomaly, the one that makes linguists lose sleep when they decide to be honest about the subject, is the Sumerian language itself. Every known language on the planet belongs to a linguistic family. Portuguese comes from Latin, which comes from Proto-Italic, which connects to Proto-Indo-European. Mandarin belongs to the Sino-Tibetan family. Arabic to the Afro-Asiatic family. Every language has grandparents, cousins, distant relatives. Sumerian has nobody. It's what linguists label an isolate, a language with no identifiable ancestor, no kinship with any other language that has ever existed on the face of the earth. That alone would be strange. A language doesn't sprout from the ground like grass. It needs an evolutionary path. It needs hundreds of generations exchanging sounds and meanings to gradually take shape. But Sumerian appears in the historical record already finished, already complex, with a grammar so rigid and so loaded with rules that it looks more like a designed system than something that grew naturally among people. Things get strange in a different way from here. Think about the languages we know well. English is full of exceptions, of irregular conjugations that follow no pattern, of words that changed meaning 3 times in 500 years. Every living language is like that, a bit messy, because it keeps transforming as people use it, as accents shift, as children pronounce things differently from their parents. Sumerian doesn't have that mess. It's symmetrical beyond reason, organized beyond reason, predictable beyond reason. Every element fits in its right place without the cracks that natural evolution always leaves behind. That raises a question nobody in university hallways likes to answer out loud. Put those two ends together. On one side are people who describe the mechanics of the solar system with a precision they shouldn't have had. On the other, a language that shouldn't exist in the form it exists. In the middle of it all, those numbers from the king list that are all divisible by 3,600. The Sumerians didn't hide what they knew. They carved everything into clay and buried it in the desert, like someone storing a message inside a capsule, knowing that one day somebody would open it. They left coordinates. They left the orbital period of something moving in the darkness, too far for any ordinary telescope to reach, too heavy not to leave a gravitational trace on its neighbors. When you take the objects that orbit beyond Neptune, those frozen bodies at the edge of the solar system, like Sedna, and look at the shape of their orbits, you notice that something big is pulling all of them in the same direction. It's not random. It's not a statistical coincidence. It's a pattern that can only be explained by the presence of a body with a mass at least 10 times that of Earth, in an ellipse so stretched that it takes exactly 3,600 years to complete one lap around the Sun. The same number. Again. This time it didn't come from a clay tablet. It came from astrophysics calculations made with data from orbital telescopes in the 21st century. Two sources separated by 5,000 years, pointing to the same cycle. And if that's already hard to swallow as coincidence, what happened in 1983 turns hard into impossible. That year, NASA put into orbit the infrared astronomical satellite, the first infrared space telescope in history. The logic behind it was simple. Objects very far from the Sun don't reflect visible light. They stay hidden in the darkness, but they still emit residual heat that can be picked up in the infrared spectrum. It's like trying to find someone in a dark room using a thermal camera instead of a flashlight. The orbital telescope did a complete scan of the sky, and a few weeks after launch, newspapers published a story that should have changed history. The Washington Post ran a headline saying astronomers had detected a gigantic celestial body at the far reaches of the solar system, something the size of Jupiter, emitting heat in the direction of the constellation Orion. The scientific community went into a frenzy. It lasted one day. The next day, the information was retracted, reclassified as an equipment error, and buried under an explanation about a distant infrared galaxy that had supposedly confused the sensors. The researchers involved were silenced. The raw data from the infrared telescope covering that strip of sky was never released to the public. If it was just an error, why the secrecy? If it was just a distant galaxy, why not publish the corrected data and close the case? Because those coordinates, when cross-referenced with the trajectory calculated from the perturbations of trans-Neptunian objects, fall exactly on the same path, the same strip of sky, the same approach vector. While governments were working to keep this information away from public eyes, the physical effects of this body's approach had already begun to show. Earth's magnetic North Pole, which for most of recorded history drifted at about 6 miles per year, sped up. Over the last 20 years, that drift has jumped to more than 37 miles per year. The magnetic field is weakening in some regions and warping in others. Volcanic activity has increased, and I'm not talking about 1 or 2 volcanoes. I'm talking about a statistical uptick in eruption frequency across the entire globe. Earth's core is heating up, and that has nothing to do with the carbon dioxide from your car's exhaust pipe. Something heavy is getting closer, and the entire planet is reacting to that weight, the way a magnet reacts when you bring a stronger magnet near it. What shifts this conversation to a different scale isn't in the sky. It's inside you. In April of 2003, the Human Genome Project was declared complete. The press celebrated as if we'd finally read the instruction manual for the human body. The celebration didn't last long behind the scenes, because geneticists came face to face with a knot nobody wanted to acknowledge. Of the 3 billion base pairs that make up our genetic code, only 2% encode proteins, those genes that determine eye color, blood type, predisposition to diseases. The other 98% was labeled junk genetic material, as if evolution, which is famous for eliminating everything that doesn't serve a purpose, had decided to carry a massive dead weight in every cell of your body out of sheer absent-mindedness. No serious biologist can account for why natural selection, which ruthlessly cuts any structure that burns energy without return, kept 98% of supposedly useless material intact for millions of years. Chromosome number 2 tells another story. Every primate on the planet, chimpanzee, gorilla, orangutan, has 24 pairs of chromosomes. Humans have 23. 1 pair vanished. Conventional genetics admits, somewhat reluctantly, that our chromosome 2 is the result of a fusion of 2 separate chromosomes that exist in other primates. They called it an evolutionary accident. Axiom analyzed the junction points of this fusion, the regions called telomeres and centromeres that ended up sealed inside the new chromosome, and calculated the probability of 2 chains of genetic code that size having collided by chance, trimmed their ends precisely, and welded themselves into a perfectly functional structure without killing the organism. The number that came out has so many zeros after the decimal point that it loses any practical meaning. To put it in perspective, you're more likely to be struck by lightning 7 times in a row than for this fusion to have happened without guidance. This has the fingerprint of genetic editing. It carries the same signature that the gene editing technique known as clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeat sleeves, when we use it in a laboratory today to cut and paste stretches of genetic material. The technique that won the Nobel Prize in 2020. That stitching was done tens of thousands of years ago. Someone built us, and they made sure to leave limits in the design. Those limits are written in your cells right now while you're listening to this. Step away from the microscope for a second and think about what we feel in our own bodies, because there are things everyone accepts as normal and never stops to ask why. Back pain. 80% of the world's adult population will experience back pain at some point in their lives. Almost everyone listening to this right now. We treat it as if it were the price of sitting too long at a desk chair, buy ergonomic pillows, do stretches, pop anti-inflammatories and move on. No other animal that walks on 4 legs has this chronic problem. Dogs don't. Horses don't. Cats spend their entire lives jumping from high places and landing on their feet without throwing out their lower back. Back pain is a problem almost exclusive to those who walk upright on 2 legs, and the reason is simple when you look at the structure of our spine. It wasn't designed for this. The mammalian spinal column evolved to work horizontally, distributing weight along an arch. Ours was bent into an S shape and forced to bear the entire weight of the torso and head vertically, as if you took a bridge and tried to use it as a pillar. It works, but it complains the whole time. The spine is just the beginning. Human childbirth is one of the most dangerous experiences in the animal kingdom. A human baby's head is disproportionately large relative to the mother's pelvic canal. In almost no other mammal species does birth carry such a high risk of death for the female. Giraffes deliver calves nearly 7 feet tall, and the process takes less than an hour. For us, labor can last days, and historically killed millions of women before modern medicine. This isn't intelligent design. It looks like a patch job, like a rushed adaptation, as if whoever built the project had crammed a head that was too big into a body that wasn't ready for it. There's more. We burn in the sun. Our own sun, the star that sustains all life on this planet, gives us cancer if we're exposed to it too long. Lizards bask all day without a problem. Seals rest on rocks under direct sunlight for hours. Most animals that live on Earth's surface have a peaceful relationship with solar radiation. We need factor 50 sunscreen just to keep from peeling. Something is off in that equation, and we've learned not to do the math. Go back to what was found inside the genome. Those 98% that science called junk hide blockers, sequences that function as biological locks, preventing certain capabilities of the body from activating. Look at human life expectancy. Considering the complexity of our cells, the regenerative capacity of our tissues, the size of our brain, and the sophistication of our immune system, the human body should last far longer than it does. Tortoises live 200 years with a nervous system infinitely simpler than ours. Greenland sharks live past 400. There's an immortal jellyfish, the Turritopsis, that simply doesn't die of old age. It reverses its own cellular cycle and starts over. And we, with all this complex biological machinery, have an expiration date glued to our chromosomes. Their tips, the telomeres, shorten with every cell division like a fuse burning down. When they run out, the cell stops renewing itself and the body begins to shut down. This mechanism works like a built-in timer, and the question nobody asks is why it exists. If evolution favors survival, why would it have installed such a tight limit on the most complex species on the planet? The answer that emerges when you put these pieces together is uncomfortable. A being that lives a short life doesn't accumulate enough knowledge to threaten whoever created it. A being with chronic pain spends energy fixing itself instead of thinking dangerous questions. A being that suffers to reproduce depends on larger social structures to survive, and social structures are easier to control than loose individuals. Each of these limitations, seen in isolation, looks like a random flaw of nature. Seen together, They form a pattern that looks an awful lot like planned containment. We were calibrated, smart enough to follow complex instructions, to organize hierarchical societies, to operate tools and build things. But not smart enough, or at least not for long enough within a single lifetime, to connect all the dots and understand where we came from and what we were made for. If someone invested all this engineering into assembling a being like us, with all these safety locks, that someone had a reason. Nobody builds a tool this sophisticated without having a specific job in mind. What was that job? Mining. We were made to dig. The Sumerian texts tell this story without beating around the bush. The Epic of Atrahasis, a document that archaeology dates to nearly 4,000 years old, describes a situation any factory manager would recognize. The Anunnaki had a lower caste called the Igigi, who did the heavy labor on Earth. After 2,500 years of shifts in the mines, the Igigi went on strike. They burned their tools, surrounded the command center, and refused to go back down. Production stopped. And what was being produced was gold, on a scale that makes any modern operation look like a hobby. Why would a people from outside the solar system need so much gold? Gold has properties that most people don't know about. It doesn't oxidize, it doesn't degrade over time, and it reflects infrared radiation with an efficiency no other element can match. If you have a planet whose orbit takes it far from the sun for thousands of years, entering zones of extreme cold and cosmic radiation, the only way to keep the atmosphere warm and protected is to suspend microscopic particles of monoatomic gold in the upper layers of the air. It works like an invisible film, reflecting heat back down and blocking radiation from outside. Earth wasn't a destination, it was a quarry. In the province of Mpumalanga, in South Africa, there are more than 200,000 circular stone structures spread across an area of roughly 77,000 square miles. Archaeologists know them as cattle pens. Except 90% of these structures have no entrance. You can't put a cow inside a stone circle that has no door. The soil composition beneath these ruins shows quartz in abundance, and the circular shape generates concentrated acoustic vibration, the kind of frequency that separates gold particles from rock when combined with water flow. Calling those things cattle pens is like calling a factory a backyard shed. They are mineral processing units, covering an entire region like an open-air factory. Nearby in Eswatini, there is a mine that even conservative science admits is 43,000 years old. Modern miners regularly stumble upon ancient tunnels perfectly aligned, with stone tools abandoned inside. The volume of rock removed from those tunnels, calculated by the void they left behind, points to 250,000 tons of pure gold extracted before the beginning of recorded history. All of recorded humanity, from every mine, every country, every century from the pharaohs to today, has gathered just over 190,000 tons. That ancient gold isn't in any treasury, any sunken ship, any central bank vault. It's no longer on this planet. When the quota was met, the problem changed in nature. The worker population, that is humans, had grown far too fast. Too many people consuming resources on a planet that had already delivered what it needed to deliver. The Epic of Atrahasis describes clearly what came next. The command decided to use a natural event they already knew was approaching, the orbital passage of Nibiru at its closest point to Earth, and simply didn't warn anyone. The gravitational effect of that passage displaced the polar ice caps all at once, throwing trillions of tons of ice into the ocean. The resulting wave swept entire continents. More than 500 cultures around the world, separated by oceans and millennia of isolation, recorded this same flood in their founding myths. It's the memory of a real event. A single member of the Anunnaki High Command, Enki, the same one who had led the genetic project, refused to participate in the extermination and leaked the information to a human whom the traditions know as Ziusudra, Utnapishtim, or Noah, depending on which version survived in your region. The so-called Ark wasn't a floating zoo. It was a storage vault for genetic material, preserved samples for later repopulation. When the waters receded and the Anunnaki came back down to the surface, they found the infrastructure destroyed, but humans still standing. The solution was pragmatic. They shortened our lifespan, divided our languages, and put us to work rebuilding. That's when they began erecting structures that no human civilization can replicate to this day. Platforms with blocks weighing over 1,000 tons, cut and fitted with a level of detail that defies any conventional explanation. But the detail that changes everything isn't in the blocks, it's in the ordinary tablets, the ones everyone assumed were barley receipts. What Axiom found in them was a mathematical pattern hidden behind the numbers of sacks and heads of cattle, and what emerged from that pattern wasn't accounting. It was an orbital tracker, counting down to the next passage. 3,600 years ago, the Bronze Age civilizations collapsed all at once. Empires that had dominated the Eastern Mediterranean for centuries turned to dust within a single generation. Hittites, Mycenaeans, the new kingdom of Egypt. Everything crumbled at the same time, accompanied by devastating droughts, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions, including the explosion of Santorini that buried half the Aegean in ash. Historians attribute this to a combination of internal factors: political instability, the invasion of the Sea Peoples, the collapse of trade routes. Nobody can justify why everything happened together in the same century, across civilizations that barely communicated with one another. Go back another 3,600 years. 7,200 years ago, sea levels rose abruptly, rupturing the isthmus of the Bosphorus and flooding a massive area that became the Black Sea as we know it today. Entire populations were swallowed by the water in a matter of months. Go back once more. 10,800 years ago, the period known as the Younger Dryas, a sudden freeze that wiped out the megafauna of 3 continents and nearly erased the human species from the map. Mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, giant sloths, all swept away in an interval that geology considers the blink of an eye. Conventional science tries to understand each of these events in isolation. A volcano here, a meteorite there, an ocean current that changed course by chance. But when you line up these collapses on a timeline and measure the distance between them, the interval is always the same: 3,600 years. The pulse of a clock nobody admits exists. If Nibiru follows an orbit so stretched that it spends most of its time in the frozen darkness beyond the Oort cloud, why hasn't any telescope picked it up yet? Because it doesn't approach from the direction we're watching. This body's orbit is tilted more than 30 degrees relative to the plane where the other planets travel. It comes from below, through the southern celestial hemisphere, a zone where historically there is far less observation equipment. Most of the world's major telescopes were built in the northern hemisphere, and for decades the survey of the southern sky took a back seat. Nibiru uses the sun itself as a shield, falling into our star's gravitational well at increasing speed, swinging around the back, and crossing the orbital plane like a projectile cutting through a room at the camera's blind angle. When 2 bodies with active iron cores, 2 planetary magnets loaded with energy, get close enough to each other within the solar wind, what happens goes beyond high tide and earthquakes. Electrical discharge between planets happens. Arcs of plasma, with the power of billions of megawatts leaping from one body to the other, like lightning between 2 clouds, only on a cosmic scale. Ancient peoples on every continent carved the same image on the walls of caves and cliff faces without ever having met one another. A figure with arms and legs spread wide, surrounded by luminous dots. Anthropologists label it shamanic rock art. When you compare those drawings with laboratory photographs showing high-energy plasma discharges, the resemblance is identical. That wasn't hallucination. The sky was on fire. If the evidence is this heavy, why doesn't any government talk about it? Why doesn't someone step up to a podium and sound the alarm? Because warning people means losing control. There's something that catches your attention when you look at where the world's big money has been disappearing to. In 2001, the day before the September 11th attacks, the Pentagon publicly admitted that $2.3 trillion had vanished from the Department of Defense's records. The next day, the archives were destroyed, and the subject died. Trillions don't vanish. Trillions turn into something else. Under Denver Airport, for instance, there's more concrete buried underground than what was used to build the terminal above ground, and nobody can satisfactorily explain what all that subterranean space is for. which spawns some pretty creative theories from tourists. Up in Svalbard in the Norwegian Arctic, they've stuffed inside a frozen mountain a vault containing seeds from every agricultural species on the planet, armored to withstand nuclear war. American billionaires are buying decommissioned missile silos in Kansas and South Dakota and converting them into luxury underground condominiums with swimming pools, movie theaters, and pantries stocked for 50 years of food, which is an expensive way to manage anxiety if you believe the world is safe. Global production of reinforced concrete and autonomous life support systems has spiked over the last 2 decades without any conventional war to justify the volume. They're not getting ready to fight each other. They're digging, exactly like we did for them thousands of years ago. The numbers, the orbits, the genes, the mines, the cycles, the bunkers, everything converges on a single point in time. A point that wasn't chosen by mystical interpretation or by guesswork. It was calculated. The tracker extracted from the cuneiform tablets works like a clock of interlocking gears. Each variable feeds the next. The position of Earth's axis in a given year crosses with the oscillation of the magnetic field, which crosses with the transit frequency of distant pulsars recorded by the Sumerians, which crosses with the 3,600-year intervals etched into the paleoclimatic records of Antarctic ice. When you run all these variables together until you find the point where the cycles synchronize, a single window remains. The data was run through Axiom, accounting for every layer of available data, from the gravitational patterns of objects beyond Neptune to the rate of acceleration of magnetic polar drift over the last 40 years. The result pointed to a specific day when Nibiru's orbit crosses the plane where Earth travels, at the minimum distance between the two bodies. October 31st, 2036. This isn't going to look like a science fiction movie. There won't be a ship descending from the sky with blinking lights. If the Sumerian texts describe anything, they describe a cold, methodical operation. Nibiru doesn't need to land. When a body 10 times heavier than Earth passes close enough, its electromagnetic field interferes with our planet's field. Earth's base frequency, what physics calls the planet's natural frequency, changes. 7.83 Hz is the stable value that has sustained the normal functioning of our biology for millennia. A shift in that frequency is not an abstract event. It messes with neural activity, with heart rhythm, with hormonal cycles, with everything that depends on electrical signals to function inside the human body. Remember the 98% of the genome that science discarded as junk? Those sequences that have too much structure to mean nothing? Remember the blockers, the locks that limit how long we live and how our brain connects. Within those sequences, there are receptors that respond to specific electromagnetic frequencies. They are dormant triggers. As long as the base frequency stays stable, they stay off. If it changes, and changes to the right value, those receptors wake up. It's biological activation by an external signal, and there's nothing supernatural about it. It's pure electrochemistry. Our genetic code is, among other things, an antenna, and it was tuned to a frequency that only appears when Nibiru gets close. What happens when those receptors switch on? The Sumerian texts know this moment as the harvest. It's not destruction for the sake of destruction. It's sorting. A check to see what the experiment produced after thousands of years of running on its own. Who evolved despite the blockers? Who maintained the ability to think clearly in a world designed to keep everyone distracted and obedient? The elites who burrowed into concrete bunkers 2 miles underground think they'll negotiate a seat at the table when the owners return. Maybe they believe that offering control of the surface as a welcome gift will be enough to buy protection. But whoever designs organisms doesn't usually ask the organism for its opinion about its future. That's a lesson any rancher knows well. We are just over 10 years away from that window. It could be that the calculations are off by a margin. It could be that the passage is more distant than the model predicts. It could be that none of this happens, and this text becomes an internet curiosity forgotten in some corner. But the magnetic poles keep accelerating, the core keeps heating up, the billionaires keep digging, the governments keep refusing to explain where the trillions are going. If all of this has a more comfortable explanation, it hasn't shown up yet. Way back at the beginning, we opened with simple questions. How many planets does the solar system have? Who knew it before us? And how did a people who lived by herding sheep describe invisible worlds with a precision it took us millennia to match? Those questions hit differently now, because the answer that came out of the clay wasn't about astronomy. It was about us. About what we are, what we were made for, and about what is moving through the darkness of space at this very moment, following a course that was carved into fired clay 5,000 years ago by hands that knew exactly when they were coming back. The sky is still there, same as always. Now you have a reason to look at it with different eyes. If you like this investigation, subscribing to the channel helps us expand the Axiom Investigation project. We would love to read your thoughts on the video's subject in the comments and your suggestion for the next topic to be covered. Tell us which city you are watching from. Thank you for staying with us until the end.